The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.
In South Africa, the parliament has begun amending the constitution to allow land owned by white South Africans to be confiscated by the government without compensation. The motion was brought by Julius Malema, a longtime gadfly and violent nutcase, who clarified that he does not support killing the entire white population right now.
Now, the South African Parliament has voted in favour of new legislation that could see land seized from white farmers. Under the plans, white farmers would be stripped of their land with no compensation, although this does run against the Constitution, which would have to be amended.
Land expropriation without compensation in South Africa, a situation that is creating conversations around the country, some of straight out fear-mongering, as you heard at the opening with the guy Tucker Carlson from Fox News. And then you had the report from Russia Today that followed it immediately. The conversations are deep. And when I say deep, I mean layered in the sense of irony. And conversations around colonialism are surfacing again, decolonialism, decolonialization, conversations around what does justice actually look like? How long from an offense should what is the statute of limitations for colonialism? Then there are some fascinating conversations, and I only have 30 minutes with you. So let me jump in with the headline from Reuters, who did a fairly good job with their article. Vote in South Africa's parliament moves land reform closer. And I'm going to read a couple paragraphs here, and we'll use that as the jump off. The ruling African National Congress has long promised reforms to redress racial disparities in land ownership, and the subject remains highly emotive. More than 2 decades after the end of apartheid, whites still own most of South Africa's land following centuries of brutal colonial dispossession. Tuesday's motion was brought by the radical left Economic Freedom Fighters, EFF party, but was supported by the ANC, the African National Congress, which controls almost 2/3 of the parliament compared to the EFF's 6%. Now, this is important. We'll talk about it later. The impact that small opposition parties can have in a parliamentary system, but it's also reflective of what a small, very vocal, very organized group can do, even in our two-party system, vis-a-vis, or rather think of the Tea Party. Now, the EFF is not the Tea Party, but by any means, by any measure. I'm only comparing them in terms of the relative size to the impact, right? So please don't take me out of context there. I want to continue with the Reuters article. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa said after his inauguration 2 weeks ago that he would speed up the transfer of land to black people, although he stressed that food production and security must be preserved. Launching a debate on the motion in Parliament, EFF leader Julius Malema said, quote, "It was time for justice on the land issue. Quote, we must ensure that we restore the dignity of our people without compensating the criminals who stole our land," he said. The motion was passed 241 in favor versus 83 votes against it. Parliament then instructed a committee to review the Constitution and report. Let's listen to a portion of the speech by the Economic Freedom Fighters leader Julius Malema, described in the right-wing media as a radical Marxist, leftist, violent man. But let's listen to what he has to say.
Fellow South Africans, almost 400 years ago, a criminal by the name of Jan van Riebeeck landed in our native land and declared an already occupied land by the native population as a no man's land. Van Riebeeck, the first descendant of the Dutch to arrive in the Cape, will later lead a full-blown colonial genocide, anti-black land dispossession criminal project, arguing that simply because our people could not produce title deeds, this land that they have been living in for more than 1,000 years was not their own. Essentially, he was disregarding their humanity, treating them as part of the animal world. To him, the Africans were less than human, not deserving of land ownership. On this basis, the project disempowering Africans of the ability to call this place their land was initiated, in blood and in pain. Millions ended up in the humiliated, conquered township condition of being cheap and easily disposable labor.
So that is the leader of the EFF party, the Economic Freedom Fighters Party, Julius Malema, and he's setting the stage, historical context, as well as his economic ideology, and that opening, letting it be known that this proposition of land expropriation without compensation is justified because of the criminal enterprise of Jan van Riebeeck, who was the first white man from the Dutch East India Company to settle in the Cape of South Africa in April of 1652. And from that settlement grew all of the colonialism, which dispossessed South Africans of their land. And because of that, his argument is simply that the land never belonged to them. The land rightfully belongs to the black people of South Africa. And as a result of that, they have the right to use this constitution, go through the legal means of revising the constitution, amending their constitution to allow for the expropriation of land without compensation. His proposition is, why should they pay criminals? Man, this guy, I'm laughing because this has opened up a Pandora's box of debate. What is the statute of limitations on colonialism? I mean, clearly you see the direct effects. Apartheid South Africa only ended 2 decades ago. So you clearly can see the effects of colonialism in South Africa when white people only make up 8% of the population, yet they own 72% of the farmlands. So you can clearly see it, but nobody said anything about this. Everybody's alarms are going off now that they're talking about expropriating this land, but nobody said a damn thing when white people who were not original, who were not indigenous people to the land, took the land and for hundreds of years used sheer brute force to occupy a land that was not theirs. And now, even after apartheid, they still own 72% of the land, only 8% of the population. Where are all the tears for this entire period? And so you cannot disconnect, right? While we may not clearly understand or have a decided or agreed upon statute of limitations for colonialism, you cannot disconnect the reality that this land, 72%, which belongs to 8% of the population, would not be in this condition. It would belong to the black people of South Africa had it not been for colonialism. And so while you may want to disconnect the statute of limitations of colonialism from today and say enough's enough, it's been long enough, well, it's staring you right in the face. It's staring you directly in the eyes. This is the effect. This is the direct result of colonialism in South Africa.
The time for reconciliation is over. Now is the time for justice. If the grandchildren of Jan van Riebeeck have not understood that we need our land, that over and above it is about our dignity, then they have failed to receive the gift of humanity. We do not seek revenge, though they caused so much evil in our land. We do not wish for their suffering, though they caused so much humiliation of countless generations. All we want, all our people ever wanted, is their land to which their dignity is rooted and founded.
I mean, I have a lot more to play clips wise from different voices, so you can get different sides of the story. But wow, there is a concerted. I'm stuttering and I'm stammering because I need to make something plain. There's a concerted fear-mongering happening right now. A genuine concern from some friends of mine and other outlets, people I don't know who are speaking their piece. They're genuinely concerned about the well-being and the humanity of white South Africans. But this reminds me of the disparity between how we treated the crack epidemic and how we are treating the opioid epidemic right now. When black people were going through the crack epidemic, crack being flooded in our communities, it's not like we had the resources to bring it here. That's a whole nother conversation. But our communities being flooded, addiction was criminalized. Not only criminalized, but we're vilified. Two totally different things. We were arrested and thrown in jail, but we were made to be fearful. People were made to fear us. Black people in general, because of what was happening in the black community. Hatred and laws, the war on drugs, an entire machine, the entire American machine was mobilized to stop this horrific drug addiction and bad behavior of black people. And now we're asked to have compassion and concern and love and consideration and take in mind the humanity of the opioid addiction crisis, which predominantly affects white Americans. The disparity is staggering because despite the hundreds of years, and maybe you say, well, we need to forget about what happened hundreds of years ago. Okay, well, under 30 years ago, 1991 was the end of apartheid in South Africa. That's my lifetime. That's your lifetime. That's your children. Some of you have children who were born in that time. This is recent, and the effects are felt today. I mean, not just in the amount of land that white people own as compared as a percentage of their population, but also in terms of just the overwhelming poverty that was caused by this. And poverty is a generational occurrence. If you're born in poverty, you're more likely to stay in poverty. That's just a statistical fact. Study after study shows that. And so if you have a system that was built on colonialism, you robbed an entire nation of their land and their ability to get wealth in that land. And that just ended 30 years ago, not even 30 years ago. How can you not see the ravages of apartheid and look and say, we need to rectify this situation? But as we rectify it, what does justice look like? Because the justice in this case would be to take land back. And that's not a pretty sight. That's not comfortable. That's not, that makes a lot of people afraid. That starts the fear-mongering crowd of the right, the far right, the Tucker Carlsons of the world. It starts them crying white genocide. And even if you said something then, even if you stood against apartheid South Africa, you can't stop there and say, well, apartheid is over and so we're done. No. How do you fix the situation? How do you reverse this? And you can't reverse it without the discomfort of somebody. And in this case, it is the discomfort of the descendants of colonizers.
There's no one who can help us because this side of the earth it's bad for us. You can't even walk in the streets around at night. During the day, they always rape you or they beat you up. They're swearing at you in the language. They know you don't know the language, but they will come and swear at you. See on the news, shoot the Boer, kill the Boer. What we are like. Just living also. We are like human beings, just like them. Just the color and the language is different. But why are they against us? Even black kids were beating my kids up, my 5-year-old. Told them this is not for you anymore. South Africa, it's for ours. Our people, we don't have a life anymore. They will make sure about it.
Have you tried to look into leaving South Africa?
If I can get a chance, I will go. If I can get a better life that side of the seas, I will go. Me and my 2 kids, I need a life to make for them.
Okay, listen, I'm a humanist. I'm a Christian humanist. I believe in the value of humanity above race. I do. But I also know in the context of the real world where we are right now, there are grievances, there are injustices that have to be rectified before we can move forward. Because we're not even remotely close to a place where black and brown people across the globe are treated as humans. And so you can't ask me to have a wellspring of sympathy for white people across the globe who are on the receiving end of what they feel is an injustice. But in reality, it's the execution of justice. You can't ask me to have sympathy there, especially if my sympathy means inaction or making me complicit with the continued injustice. And this is what the video that you, or the audio that you just listened to, is seeking. It is seeking to play on the heartstrings of humans and say, oh, this is such an injustice. This is a video by Lauren Southern on Facebook, the audio that you just listened to. Lauren Southern, as I try to find out more of who she is, I could tell you who she is by who she shares and what shows she goes on. If you go to her Twitter timeline, she's sharing Paul Joseph Watson. She's sharing Steven Crowder, far right-wing people who believe in white genocide. So this, to them, this is a call to arms. This is a call to being a decent human being for the sake of all the poor. So here's the reality. And I'm not negating the situation of the woman I'm not minimizing the situation of the woman in the video that you listen to, the audio that you listen to. But the blame that they're placing the blame in the wrong place. Rich South Africans got the hell out of South Africa around 1994 after that African National Congress came in and swept. I mean, they came into a great majority. Rich South Africans got the hell out of Dodge. And so now they're blaming their plight in life, the fact that they're living in poverty. Where you have poverty, you have violence. Let's be real. It's not as though the woman in this video is being assaulted by well-to-do black South Africans. She's probably being assaulted in the case, and I don't doubt it. I don't have to say, she's saying what she's saying is untrue. I mean, no, violence is systemic, is endemic to poverty. And there are just as many. I mean, there are more. I was about to say there are just as many, but no, there are actually far more impoverished black South Africans right now today in South Africa. But yet we're supposed to have a wellspring of sympathy for poor white South Africans. Especially when that sympathy is going to be used to make us complicit and make us stand still and do nothing, accomplices to a continued injustice. The jig is up, man. We're smarter than that. You're insulting our intelligence, for the love of God. But this is a movement. There's a movement that's trying to paint the poverty and the despair of white South Africans as something that is being caused by reverse racism. And this South Africa case is a perfect example of black supremacy. And no, this is an example of the complexities that happen when you begin the process of decolonialization. When you take the boot of the oppressor off of your neck, even though the oppressor has been there 400 years. And so you're really talking about their great-great-great-great-grandchildren. But when the exploitation is so clear, 72% of the land owned by white people in South Africa, and they only make up 72% of the farmland owned by 8% of the population. They only make up 8% of the population. You can't tell me, the same people who tell us to go back to Africa, you cannot tell me that this is not directly connected. I'm sorry, why am I even making this logical argument? You told us to go back to Africa. Why wouldn't you just tell your people to go back to Britain? Go back to the UK. But notwithstanding that fallacious argument, I would say, how can you look at the disparity in land ownership and say nothing about it? But expect us. And see, here's the other thing. They're trying to tie this into the poverty that you see in white South Africans. They're trying to tie it into the dispossession of farmlands. But the jig is up, people. Those poor white South Africans don't own any land. They don't own any of the farmlands that will be expropriated. Come on. Don't play us for stupid. Your propagandistic games don't work in the United States. How do you think they're going to work on something in South Africa? The poor and the dispossessed white South Africans, they are poor and dispossessed not because of reverse racism, not because of the end of apartheid, but because of the ravages of capitalism. They would be poor and dispossessed no matter where they went. Because there's always going to be a poor and dispossessed white working class just because of the nature and structure of capitalism. But yet they're trying to use this opportunity where we're lifting off the EFF, the Economic Freedom Fighters, are partnering with the party in power, the African National Congress, and they're lifting off the boot of the oppressor, the people who still benefit from white colonialism. It is as much an affront to capitalism as it is to racism. I'm feeling this story this morning because this is such a clear example of the games that are played across the globe, trying to use poor white people as a means of stopping the progress of black people, both poor and well-to-do, in the name of fear of blackness, and in the name of the statute of limitations for slavery and the statute of limitations for colonialism. Well, you can clearly see right here today the direct line from the crimes of colonialism to the percentage of land owned by white people in South Africa who were never supposed to be there in the first place. And yet they're playing they're viral. I mean, all over. Oh, we're so sad. Why can't black people just get along? Why can't we just, it's such a sad. You know what? The land can I repeat for the cheap seats in the balcony? The farmland that is going to be expropriated does not belong to the poor white people of South Africa in the first place.
White poverty in South Africa has doubled since the non-racial election in 1994. People like Elsabe Blignot are stepping in to help. She goes door to door in poor white areas with bags of food.
When I first met Sis and her family, they were all sleeping on the floor. They were on the cement. They had no beds, they had no furniture, they had absolutely nothing.
Living conditions similar to what you will find in many of the black townships.
So all 11 people sleep in this house?
Yes.
It's very small though.
Oh, very, very small.
Laura Fenter and her children, her sister's family. Her mother, Petronella Casimir, lives here too. And they all survive on her $94 a month pension. Petronella believes there's only one reason why they are in this desperate state. It started, she says, when the black government came to power 15 years ago.
In the past, we were the apartheid years, and it's the white people put them down, and now it's their time to put us down.
I think that this clip is so important because look at what happens in this clip, right? You have the announcer who describes these terrible situations, impoverished situations that white South Africans are now having to live in. The poverty rate in South Africa for white people has doubled since the end of apartheid, right? Now, not taking the context of any global trends towards poverty, the increase in poverty, homelessness across the globe, but they credit it to the end, or at least they reference the end of apartheid as a starting point. But then in this clip, the announcer says that these people who he's doing a case study on, 2 families, 11 people living in one household, extreme poverty, they're living in the same exact conditions as many black townships. In other words, they're in parity. They're living just like so many black South Africans. But somehow we're supposed to have more concern for white South Africans who are living now in the same type of conditions as black South Africans. Can you see the problem with this? That's the first thing. And then the second half of the conversation, she blames this as being a part of black people now putting down white people the way white people in South Africa used to put down black people. But no. You don't understand. Honey, you're now living in equality. You're in the equalities. You're in the equal system of a capitalist system that does not give preferential treatment to you because you're white. And to you, that feels like an injustice. And to people like the right wing in America, they're like, oh, this is such an atrocity. Look at all the people who are being punished because they're white. No, they're not being favored because they're white. Apartheid created a system that took anybody that was white and gave them preference over anybody that was black, no matter how qualified the black person was. And when you end that system, inherently in a capitalistic system, you're going to have people who fall to the bottom, who, based on the so-called meritocratic system of capitalism, they're supposed to be there in the first place. Why doesn't this lady get a job? Why is she living off a pension? Why is she existing on the draining the economic? She's a welfare queen. Is the language that they would use if this person was black. This clip is so important. It's from World Focus, worldfocus.org. It's an old clip. It's an old website. The website's not even maintained anymore, but you can find it on YouTube. Google World Focus and go listen to the entire clip. But look at how they paint white poverty as a problem of reverse racism in a post-apartheid South Africa, when ending And when ending apartheid brought a modicum of equality without reversing the ravages and the effects of colonialism, because you still have 72% of the land owned by 8% of the people, white people. So in the context of a moderately just society where you're not privileged to get a job, even if you're beyond mediocre or below mediocre, you still get a job and you get preferential treatment because you're white. In that type of system, or in the absence of that type of system, they feel that the only reason that they are impoverished is because of reverse racism. And this is the tiny violin that they're playing all around the world. If I'm going to fight on behalf of those white South Africans, I'm going to fight for them for the right reason. And the right reason is that even in the midst of all the wealth that's generated by colonialism and racism across this country, poor white people still get screwed. And it's a part of capitalism, pure and simple. But they will side against me. Just like they're going to side against Malema. They're going to side against anyone who speaks clearly about the legacy of racism, colonialism, slavery here in the United States, apartheid in South Africa, and soberly about the reality that they're just fighting in a system that's no longer tilted to. It's like, what's the best example? It's like being a poker player and you win all the time because you cheat. That was apartheid. And now you've been busted. You can no longer cheat. And you turn out to be pretty average, below average, mediocre. And now you lose all your earnings. That's the logic that they're using to explain their poverty. And they're missing a complete class analysis that capitalism across the globe will always rape you no matter what race you are. And in the presence of vast poverty, ravaging poverty, you will get crime. You will get assault. You will get racially based crime. There are poor black people who can't stand poor white South Africans for what they did to South Africa based on race. Let's be clear. What was done to South Africa was the same thing that's done across the globe to black and brown people, particularly black people, was because of our race, to the benefit of capitalism. And what they're experiencing now is a direct result of capitalism, but yet they want to blame it on race when all that happened was a modicum of equality was brought into existence. It reminds me of the tweet from my friend here in Atlanta, Torrin Walker. He said this morning on Twitter, quote, "If people got jobs based solely on merit or skill, a lot of you white men would be jobless." I'm sorry. It's a little harsh. It's harsh, but it's true. It's true. I mean, it's true. Based if you believe that all men and women are created equal, then you have to ask yourself the question of the advantage that white men have in this world. Why do they own most of the wealth? Why do they have most of the political power? Why do they have the top jobs? Why do they have the top incomes? I mean, you have to argue the opposite. You honestly would have to believe that white men are just better than everyone else. And I'm the one who's being called a racist for having this conversation.
Let us unite and pay no one for benefiting from the crimes against humanity. Let us come together and agree on this noble, historic and human call to expropriate land without compensation for equal redistribution. We invite you to engage, not to pick up spears and guns. We invite you to come to the table and realize that nothing means anything for our people except their dignity in the land ownership. For a lasting peace, security, and justice, land must be expropriated without compensation for equal redistribution.
Okay, so this is again Julius Malema. He is the commander-in-chief, is his actual title, of the Economic Freedom Fighters party there in South Africa, the 6% of the parliament there who has pushed this global conversation by pushing the African National Congress Party into adopting the resolution to amend the Constitution to allow for land expropriation without compensation. His argument here, while it seems harsh, I mean, the underlying argument isn't terrible. Why should they be responsible for paying for the pleasure of being brutally assaulted, having their land dispossessed, raped, pillaged, and plundered for hundreds of years? And the direct result can be seen tangibly. It is not an abstract thing. The effects of colonialism in South Africa is not an abstract thing that can't be seen. 72% of the farmland owned by 8% of the population, which is white. So the direct effects can be seen. There's a direct line. It's not an abstract concept that they tried to make it out to be. And so he's saying, why should we pay you for you benefiting from brutally assaulting our nation to the point of genocide? So, whoo, man, this is going to be some interesting times ahead. I really wonder if they're going to be able to play on the heartstrings of the United Nations and get the United Nations involved against this action. In the United States, I'm sure it's going to be pretty easy to get the United States involved against this action, particularly with one Donald Trump in the White House. But it's funny, his core group of supporters would be ethno-nationalists. It's funny how they're going to be on the opposite side of this argument. And maybe I need to dig down a little bit deeper. Maybe they aren't. I wonder what the ethno-nationalists are saying about this, because this fits part and parcel with their ideology that Africa's for Africans, right? But now that you have a guy who is moving in the realm of an ethno-state, and actually, he's not telling them they have to leave. He's just saying that you have to give up the land. So I correct myself. He's not moving in the realm of ethno-states. He's moving in the realm of reparations. But I wonder in the United States, that's going to be, it's going to be an interesting time to see the various people who fall. You know who you're going to get? Let's go ideology by ideology. You're going to get a lot of liberals who see the pain of South Africans, poor South Africans, who are going to conflate the poverty that's currently happening in South Africa with this action. And I would hope that you could clarify for them that poverty existed before the end of apartheid. It doubled after apartheid, but it doubled in the presence of, or in the absence of, a system that was rigged to their favor. So it only makes sense that it would double. So this poverty is not as a result of reverse racism. It's the result of the end of racism, of an apartheid state. So liberals are going to have their heartstrings plucked and be like, oh, we have to do something. We can't let this happen. Particularly neoliberals economically, they're going to look at this and say, oh, my goodness. I mean, the articles are already coming out. The banks are going to fail. They're going to be stuck with so many bad loans. Yeah. The banks are going to be stuck with bad loans. But, banks are resourceful and resilient, and they have plenty of money. And they're going to want to continue their operations. They're going to want to continue to make money. If they can't make money off of the mortgages for the land, then they want to continue making money off of the operations from the products that are being produced on these farmlands. But you're going to have a lot of neoliberals who are going to say, oh, economically, this is just unsound, right? We have to protect land rights, right? This is a core tenet of capitalism, is the protection of land rights. So you're going to have a lot of people who pose it from there. I mean, I really honestly see the world coming down against South Africa in favor of people who directly benefited from colonialism. In a very direct way. Conservatives are already all over it. American conservatives particularly, they think this is white genocide. I'm not really sure where this goes. I'm not really sure where this goes or how this plays out. But one last argument, we're already over time, but one last argument that I think is so insidious and so such a representation of the malignancy of racism.
Many want us to debate food security and economic development, but how can we do so when we do not have the land? They want us to come to the table with their bosses as beggars, because that is unacceptable.
Malema is briefly referring to or referencing an argument that is very prevalent. If you give this land back to black people, then they're going to end up like Zimbabwe. Because inherently in the mind of so many white people across this globe, black people are incapable, incompetent. They're not able to exist without white people. They're not able to prosper without white people. And this idea is so prevalent that you actually have it. It's argued by black people. This is one of the most insidious propositions, that black people are incapable of managing their own lives, that black people are incapable of prospering and thriving in the absence of whiteness. This is so insidious. And the reason I use the word insidious is because it is so unspoken, and yet the impact of it is so profound. Consider for the moment the 72% of the farmland owned by white South Africans, while they're only 8% of the population, is actually run, managed, and maintained and worked by black South Africans. Like, they are the labor force. They are what Malema called the cheap and easily disposable labor force. And so it is not as though that South Africans don't have the skill set necessary to make this thing work. In fact, they are the ones who are currently making it work. And yet the argument that is so prevalent is that there's going to be a shortage of food, that there's going to be, it's going to end up like Zimbabwe. It's going to end up, because black people aren't capable. This is literally the core of the argument against this. The prevalent argument against this is that there's going to be a breakdown in food security. There's going to be a breakdown in food supplies. And it's so prevalent that even the president of the African National, or the president of South Africa, who's also the leader of the African National Congress, is making the argument himself. He's saying that before we proceed, we have to ensure that food supplies continue. Look at but black people are the ones who are making these things happen. It reminds me too much. It's too close to home. It reminds me too much of white Americans in the United States of America who want black excellence. They see what you do. They want it. They want to hire it. They want to pay you as little as they possibly can to get you to work for them. But they don't want your leadership, right? They think that they own your labor. They actually want to own your labor, and they want to own your greatness, but they don't want your leadership. They don't want your ideas unless they could take credit for your ideas. I'm talking from personal experience. Check my article coming out soon. This idea that black people can't thrive and prosper without white people, that is such an insidious vestige of slavery and Jim Crow here in the United States, and apparently globally. While in the meantime, it is black people who is tending the land and making their land and their ventures successful. So I'm not sure how this is going to play out in South Africa. But a few things are clear. Number one, justice is not always pretty. And while we will never have an agreed upon statute of limitations for colonialism, there is a direct line that can be clearly seen in the land ownership in South Africa, where 72% of the land is owned by 8% of the population, which is white. And for those who are saying, yeah, but this land was worked by white people. No, this land was worked by black people. This land was, just like America was built by black people. We'll never get the credit for it, because why would they ever give slaves credit? Hell, I have grown sad men today who don't want to give me credit for my ideas. You think that some colonizer is going to want to give credit for a nation being built on the backs of black people? That's number one. Number two, the poverty that you see in white South Africans has nothing to do with reverse racism. This is what happens when you have a modicum of parity, when apartheid is ended and you no longer have a pure advantage simply because of your race. In that type of equal world, you are an equal victim of capitalism. And if you want to address the poverty, the gross poverty that exists in black communities, and that no one is pointing out, they're just pointing out the white poverty. If you want to address that, then you have to address it through a class analysis. You have to address it through a critique of capitalism, because this is what capitalism creates all around the globe. And finally, as to the question of whether there should be compensation, I don't know the answer to that. I'm not sure that I actually agree with Malema on no compensation. But I absolutely agree that it should not be anything that's going to keep South Africa in debt along the lines of what happened to Haiti. Haiti constantly having to pay to France for the privilege of being enslaved, privilege of being colonized, privilege of having been brutally assaulted through generations, pilfered and plundered the wealth, and buy them some plane tickets and send them on their way. And if you don't want to do that, then do the right thing, which would be the EFF. If you're really serious about this from an economic critique, then the right thing to do after this repossession of land, this expropriation of land, would be to address the problems of capitalism, how it affects black and white people and people of color, people of every race across the globe. Once we address the problem of racism, then I do fully expect for them to address the problem of capitalism. That's all the time I have for you today. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. It's always a pleasure. Thanks to our patrons. Patrons, you are the real MVP. I honestly can't do it without you. I am no longer working for Content News, which means I am in transition. I am actually out. I'm going to hit the streets now to go talk to a couple of news outlets and radio stations and try to get picked up there. But in the meantime, patrons, you have saved the day. Read between the lines as you will and feel guilty if you must, but go to www.patreon.com/the BPD show and become a patron today to make sure that I don't have to go back to the strip club. And in my world, the strip club is a classroom. God, if I have to go back and teach, shoot me in the face, as my colleague Rebecca Azor says. Have a great day, everyone. See you tomorrow.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.